The dawn was creeping up behind the ragged outline of Winterfell's towers when Bran Stark opened his eyes. He felt the icy wind against his cheeks, a chill that rattled the marrow of his bones, but his gaze drifted beyond the wall of frosted oak and iron that lay before him. He was not in his body. He was high above it, whispering on the wings of ravens, feeling the tense quiver that ran through the trees. His consciousness soared, searching, yearning for something beyond the realm of mortal sense. And somewhere in that endless tide of possibility, he touched an ancient power, something that had slumbered in the north since the earliest days. His mind clenched at the edges of it, a root of memory older than the wall itself. He had told no one. Not Arya. Not Sansa. Not Jon Snow, wherever he might be that morning, probably readying the troops. This was too strange, too big a leap even for him. He scarcely believed it himself. Yet as he drifted back into his own mind, settling behind his tired young eyes, he breathed in a new calm. If there was any chance of hope in the blackness that approached them, he had to take it. The dead were on the march, their pale spiders scuttling across the tundra, their monstrous abominations only days away. The people of the north had braced themselves with trembling hearts. So many sacrifices. So many lost. And he, Bran, the three-eyed raven, had just brushed the echoes of a great and impossible secret. He allowed his vision to settle on his surroundings, the godwood. The red leaves of the weirwood tree quivered in the cold breeze. Its face, carved so many centuries ago, gleamed with sap like tears of blood. A swirl of snow dusted Bran's cloak, and he exhaled, trying to keep himself steady. The dawn light cast an eerie shimmer on the pond, a thin layer of ice drifting across its surface. He knew that the line between life and death would soon stretch as thin as that fragile film. When Samwell Tarly had first come to him with those dusty scrolls, whimpering in his gentle manner, speaking of what the old maesters dismissed as rumors from the Age of Heroes, Bran had not immediately believed. The text had been uncertain, half lost. An account by a wandering woods witch who spoke of powers the first men once embraced, spells tied to the heart trees. Bran had realized in the nights that followed that the words in that ancient parchment might not be mere fantasy. He had begun to dream then, to slip deeper into the weirwood's memory. He found shapes in the darkness, flickers of tall shadows in the crypts beneath Winterfell. The last night, the face he saw was as familiar to him as his own reflection, a stern face with sad gray eyes. Ned Stark. Eddard Stark was a name that still carried weight in the hearts of the North, even long after his fall. Mention him in the courtyard and you saw men bow their heads in respect. Speak of him in the halls and you felt hushes of reverence. He was the man who had guided Winterfell with unwavering principle, who had tried to maintain honor in a land that often spat on such ideals. He was a father that Bran himself had barely begun to know before losing him. Yet now, in the swirling depths of weirwood dreams, Bran had glimpsed the improbable, a flicker of his father's presence, strong, unwavering, and filled with regret. Bran blinked slowly as he freed himself from the vision. He wondered if the others would call him mad for even daring to attempt what he was planning. They had the living to worry about, not the dead. And yet, ironically, their greatest enemy was death itself. This war was not a mere quarrel between houses. This was the war for the breathing world. And if the living must summon strange alliances to face the darkness, why not an alliance with those who had preceded them? He bowed his head, letting his cold fingers rest on the rough bark of the weirwood trunk. The tree was a conduit to ancient magic, a living memory of the North. It had been witness to countless births, battles, and burials. In it, the spirits of the old gods murmured. Bran did not pray to them exactly, but he reached for the power they harbored in their silent watch, seeking the slender thread of possibility. Down in the crypts, he whispered to himself, "That is where my father rests. His bones are part of Winterfell, and Winterfell is part of me." He summoned the ravens, not physically, not with a call of his voice, but with his mind. He felt them take flight, swirling in the sky overhead, black silhouettes against the pallid dawn. He drifted with them across the courtyard. Men and women, nearly all exhausted and bruised, hustled about with swords strapped across their backs and cloaks pressed against their throats. Everyone felt winter's bite now. The walls of Winterfell offered thin comfort at best. But still they labored, for the army of the dead waited for no one. Bran's view shifted, each raven taking him to a different corner of the castle. Gray horses stomped in the stables, uneasy. Ghost, Jon's white direwolf, prowled near the gates. And then, in the gloom of the eastern courtyard, he spied Arya. She was training by herself, as she often did, movements fluid as water. Bran's heart clenched. He wanted to tell her, to share this strange burden. But no, not yet. She would not believe me. Or maybe she would. Arya believed in many impossible things now, had done many impossible things herself. Still, he hesitated. Let me see if I can make sense of it first, he decided. Let me see if I can do what the weirwood dreams have hinted. He withdrew from the ravens, gently returning them to their perches in the cold air. Then, with trembling hands, he guided his wheeled chair toward the heart tree. He pressed his palm to the trunk. He closed his eyes. The wood was bone-chilling, the ridges biting into his flesh. But he breathed in, slow and steady, conjuring the images, summoning the chant. He had memorized it in the hush of the night, scouring every corner of Sam's old text while Sam stuttered about forbidden necromantic lore. It sounded like something out of a nightmare. The entire notion of summoning the dead reeked of taboo. But the world was ending. Taboos lost their meaning when an enemy threatened to extinguish humanity. Bran let the wind swirl around him. He reached outward and inward at once, searching for that cosmic hum that connected every root and branch of the weirwood to the land. The children of the forest had once danced in these glades, calling upon the same deep magic that had shaped the White Walkers themselves. If that dreadful knowledge could be used to bring one soul back to fight, then so be it. No cost was too high if it gave them an advantage. In the darkness of his mind, the old power stirred, crackling like frost underfoot. He felt the flow of time wavering, saw glimpses of swirling images, the crypts beneath Winterfell with their statues of stone kings and lords, the winding labyrinth of arches that led deeper and darker until the final resting place of Eddard Stark, the father whose remains had returned home posthumously. There was that face once more, stoic, kindly, worn with the weight of duty. The father he had known, if only briefly. Bran spoke the words that had no meaning in the common tongue. They were syllables that rolled in his head like echoes from a place beyond memory. The wind hissed through the red leaves above him, and he felt them swirl around him in a dance that belonged to older eras. The ground felt as though it rumbled under his chair. The air grew thick. The sky dimmed, though the sun had already begun to rise. He pictured each element of the crypt. He pictured the bones. He pictured the faint echo of Ned's soul tethered to the cold stone. He called upon that tether, that bond of blood. Through the weirwood, he reached across the veil. He did not know how long he stayed like that. His breath caught, and for a moment he felt no air in his lungs. A sense of falling, of spiraling into blackness. Then he saw the crypt more clearly than before. Not just the crypt in memory, but the crypt in the present. The tomb was moving, trembling. The dust of centuries quivered in the musty air. The statue of Ned, carved in his likeness, seemed to watch. There was a stirring among the bones, a breeze that should not exist that far underground. Bran's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind throbbed. He felt as if every nerve in his body were on fire. But he held to it, focusing on that familiar face, that fatherly presence. A flash of light behind his eyelids, brilliant, sudden, then gone. He gasped. His eyes snapped open. He was back in the Godwood. The wind had settled. The leaves had gone still. He felt hollow, like a husk. The sun had risen higher than before, and he guessed he had been in that trance for longer than he realized. His body ached. His stomach lurched. But inside, there was a tiny spark. He had done something, or at least he believed so. He allowed the quiet to envelop him, leaving the details of his success or failure unknown for the moment. There was only one way to see if it had worked, to check the crypt. But not yet. He needed his strength. He would send no one else. This magic, if it had worked, would yield something fragile. Something that might defy every law of life and death as they knew it, and he must handle it carefully. An hour passed, or perhaps two. He recovered slowly, drinking water from a canteen that a passing soldier offered him. The man asked if the boy was well, but Bran only nodded. He gave no explanation. No one asked too many questions of the quiet, distant Stark who had become the three-eyed raven. They only gave him a wide berth, suspecting he saw more than any mortal should. Eventually, Bran mustered the energy to move. He guided his chair along the narrow path out of the Godwood, across the courtyard, and down a small ramp that led toward the entrance to the crypts. The gloom at the base of the stairs seemed to intensify the beating of his heart. Each thump resounded in his ears, and the memory of that shimmering power still tingled in his limbs. No one else was down there. Most of the living kept away from the crypts unless they were lighting torches or leaving offerings. The smell of damp stone greeted Bran. He paused to let his eyes adjust, rolling the chair forward with deliberate slowness. Torches on the walls burned low, leaving elongated shadows on the ground. The corridor stretched before him, lined with the resting places of long-dead Starks. Their stone effigies lay vigil, carved dire wolves at their feet, swords across their laps. The flickering torchlight made it seem as if the stone eyes were watching him. He reached the corner that led deeper to the more recent tombs. He swallowed hard. If he was wrong, then he would find only silence, dead bones in a sealed coffin. Perhaps in that case, he would breathe a sigh of relief. The alternative was unthinkable. And yet, part of him longed to see his father again, even if it was only an echo, a revenant summoned by powers best left untouched. The world needed Ned Stark's spirit now more than ever. The corridor ended in a wide alcove where the last generation of Starks lay. And there, in the flicker of half-dim torches, he saw it, the heavy lid of Ned's sarcophagus was askew. A chill coiled up Bran's spine. It had shifted several inches, leaving a gap that gaped like a wound in the stone. His breath caught. He could see splinters of old debris scattered around it, and the statue that had once been perched above was cracked, its features chipped. He forced his chair closer, the wheels grinding softly over the ancient floor. He could feel the oppression of this place, an odd hush that felt both sacred and violated. He peered over the edge of the coffin. The interior was in shadow. He saw scraps of cloth, dusty remnants. But the shape he expected to see was gone. His father's remains were not there. Bran closed his eyes. It was real. The magic he had invoked, that old power, had done something that shattered the boundaries of reason. But where was Ned? He heard a soft scrape behind him, like a boot brushing against stone. His heart thudded so loudly it almost deafened him. Slowly, he turned his chair, the torchlight dancing in front of him. In the shadows near the corridor's far side, a figure stood. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a cloak of dark gray. He wore no helmet, carried no drawn sword. His hair was streaked with gray, his features mostly hidden by darkness, but Bran could see the familiar line of his jaw, that calm stance reminiscent of the father he remembered. The figure took a single step forward. An echo of sorrow glimmered in those gray eyes, though the faint light made them look almost silver. Bran's throat tightened until he could scarcely breathe. There was a rush of emotion he couldn't quite name, fear, awe, love, horror. "Father." Bran's voice came out as a whisper, so soft he barely recognized it. For a moment, there was no answer. Then, from the man's lips, came a voice that sounded so heartbreakingly familiar that Bran nearly burst into tears. "Bran," he said, the name resonating, somehow gentle and weary and stunned all at once. "My son." The undead hush in that word made Bran tremble. This was not a wight, not a shambling husk with blue glowing eyes. This was something else, something that wore the face and voice of Eddard Stark, yet stood in the crypt as real as any living man. The father who had lost his head in King's Landing now stood unbowed, hair intact, eyes filled with an echo of mortal sorrow. A tear escaped Bran's eye. "Is it really you?" Bran's voice cracked. He knew how naive the question sounded. He who had glimpsed all times at once, who had soared through the weirwoods, should not be so uncertain. But he was a boy again, looking at a father he had lost. The figure nodded. "I remember the black cells in King's Landing. I remember the sword, ice, and how it was taken from me. I remember your faces and then, darkness. But you have called me back. I can feel it. Something binds me here that should not be." Bran nodded. I had to. We're at war again. With an enemy that goes beyond men. Father, the dead are marching, led by the Night King. They mean to destroy us all. We have few enough allies." He had 1,000 explanations, but none that felt sufficient. "I'm sorry." Ned Stark's eyes fell to the floor. His brow furrowed. "You've woken me from a dreamless rest. For that I do not blame you. It is not a time for blame, is it?" His gaze lifted and met Bran's. "But it must be dire indeed for you to attempt such a thing." Bran nodded. "It is. Jon tries to gather men, Dany is here with dragons, and yet he swallowed. We're losing, I fear, even with every kingdom united. You taught me once that we Starks must stand for the living, for the realm, even if it costs us everything. That's why Father, I don't know what else to do." Ned stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate, as though each step tested the boundaries of his new existence. He knelt by Bran's chair, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. The pressure was solid and real. Bran felt its warmth, or perhaps only imagined it. But it did not feel like the cold grasp of the undead. Instead, it was comforting, heartbreakingly familiar. "This burden you bear is great," Ned murmured. His voice had a rasp as if it emanated from deep in his chest. "But I will help you carry it. If I have been called back for one purpose, then let it be to protect those I love, those who remain. We must protect the North." Tears blurred Bran's vision. He nodded wordlessly, pressing his hand over his father's. Was this truly happening? The impossible was no longer impossible. The army of the dead had taught them that. A man returned from the grave was just another miracle or another horror in a world turned upside down. They lingered in the crypt for a time. Ned gazed around, taking in the tombs of his ancestors, his expression etched in sorrow for the quiet that had once been his eternal rest. Bran could sense that he was not entirely at peace, that some part of him might still yearn to lie undisturbed. But that was a choice he had never been given in life or in death. For the sake of the living, Ned Stark was here once more, an echo made flesh. At last, Bran guided them out of the crypts. The sunlight in the courtyard was blinding at first, and Ned shielded his eyes, tilting his head as though reacquainting himself with the warmth. They did not announce him openly. Bran slipped him through a side corridor, passing only a few scattered guards who took no special notice. Most were too busy with preparations to pay attention to a father and son in quiet conversation. Cloaked in a thick hood, Ned kept his face low, hands clasped behind his back. Bran led him into a small antechamber near the Great Hall, a place where they might speak away from prying eyes. The boy had so many questions, so much he needed to explain, but how could he begin? And how would the others react? My sisters are here. Sansa, Arya, Bran said quietly. Rickon. He's gone. The Boltons killed him. Robb died as well, at the Red Wedding. He trailed off, uncertain how to deliver so many tragedies, so many heartbreaks. Ned's jaw tightened. Pain flashed across his eyes. I sensed loss, he said. I don't know how else to describe it. As if some part of me felt the pull of each passing. My sweet children, he closed his eyes. I wish I could have spared you all these horrors. Bran reached out and took his father's hand again. We carry on as Starks do. Sansa is Lady of Winterfell now. Arya, she's changed. She's not the little girl you remember chasing cats with needle. She's become something else. Strong and fierce. Jon is. We discovered who he really is, father, but that's a long story and one you might hear from him. But you should know he's braver than ever, determined to save us all. And he loves the North as deeply as you did. Ned nodded slowly. He was always a good man. Let him keep that goodness. They fell silent as though the enormity of everything between them weighed too heavily on words. In the flickering torchlight, Ned's face was ghost pale, yet not drained of life the way a White's would be. If anything, he looked almost entirely mortal except for an otherworldly glint in his eyes, like starlight caught in gray steel. How will we fight them? Ned finally asked. If these White Walkers are truly as fearsome as you say, if the long night has returned, what can mere swords do? Bran's mouth pressed into a line. Dragonglass and Valyrian steel can kill Whites and White Walkers. Fire helps. Dragons help. But the dead come in vast numbers, unstoppable, without fear. He paused. There is one among us who hunts them more fiercely than any, but I hesitate to say her name. If the stories are to be believed, her very existence stands in defiance of the White Walkers. She's not one of us exactly. She calls herself the Red Woman. But we have no choice but to trust those who stand against the Night King. Ned nodded, his expression grave. I will stand with you all. My sword is yours if I can wield one again. Bran studied him. The sword that was once yours was taken by Tywin Lannister and reforged into two blades. One is carried by Jaime Lannister. The other was once in Joffrey's hands, but no more. It's a complicated story. Perhaps we can find you another Valyrian steel sword, though they're rare. Ned exhaled, the corners of his mouth drawing tight. Ice is lost, then. So be it. A flicker of bitterness crossed his face, but he said no more. That was always his way, accepting the bitter truths of life without complaint, forging ahead and. No matter what was taken from him, Bran felt a pang of admiration and pity. To be thrust back into a living world stripped of so many cherished things. It was a harsh awakening. Before they could speak further, there came a light scratching at the door. Bran tensed. A voice. Bran? Are you in there? It was Arya. Bran rolled his chair toward the door, beckoning Ned to remain hidden in the shadows. Then he opened the door a crack and peeked out. Arya stood in the hallway, wearing a simple gray tunic. There was something sharp in her eyes as she studied Bran. You're always disappearing, she chided. Don't try to slip away again without telling me what you're doing. Bran gave a faint shrug. I was thinking, in private. Sorry. Arya tried to peer around him, but he maneuvered the doorway to block her line of sight. She arched a brow. What's going on in there? Her instincts were honed beyond that of a normal warrior. She could sense something was amiss. Bran's heart pounded. He felt torn. Should he show her now? How would she react? This was not some small secret. This was a miracle that defied everything they knew. He hesitated for one breath too long, and Arya's eyes narrowed. She brushed him gently aside. She was not the same little sister who used to make faces at him during feasts. She was swift as a cat. In an instant, she slipped around Bran's chair and stepped into the room. She froze. Ned Stark emerged from the shadows, hood sliding back to reveal his face. Arya's breath caught in her throat. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She took a single step forward, as if not trusting her own sight. "Father?" she whispered, voice trembling. Ned inclined his head. His own eyes shone with unshed tears. "Arya." She stood there, stunned beyond measure, as though the world had unraveled. For a moment, she looked small and vulnerable, the child she had once been, the child she had tried so hard to bury. Then she rushed forward, flinging herself into his arms, forgetting all caution, all wariness. He caught her in a gentle embrace, burying his face in her dark hair. She was sobbing, though she rarely cried now. She had seen too many horrors to weep for them, but this was overwhelming. She clutched at the cloak that shrouded him. Bran watched, tears in his own eyes. He could see the swirl of conflict in Arya's face. Joy, disbelief, fear that this might be a trick of the faceless men's illusions or some shape-shifting specter. But it felt so real, so heartbreakingly real. The shape of his shoulders, the warmth of his voice, even the faint smell that clung to his cloak, reminiscent of the stone halls of Winterfell. "How?" Arya managed to utter between quiet sobs. Bran spoke softly, uncertain how to frame it. "Magic older than men. I found a way. I didn't dare hope it would work, but it did. I'm sorry if this is a shock." Arya pulled back, tears streaking her cheeks, and stared into Ned's eyes. She searched them for any sign of falsehood. He met her gaze steadily, sadness etched in his features. "It is I, little one," he murmured, "but we have little time to linger on miracles. A great threat looms. Your brother says the dead march against us." Arya swallowed hard, as if only now recalling the entire war that pressed upon their doorstep. She wiped her face hastily, nodding. "They do, and it's going to be worse than anything we've ever seen." Ned set his jaw. "Then I must stand with you. Let the White Walkers tremble before the might of House Stark." She almost smiled, the corners of her mouth twitching. But it was a broken smile, tempered by heartbreak. "Then come. Sansa. She must see you." But she hesitated. "We must be careful. Others might be alarmed." Bran nodded, uncertain how to phrase the next part. The thought of parading an undead Eddard Stark through the courtyard was unimaginable. There would be panic, confusion, perhaps accusations of dark magic and curses. Yet Sansa had to know. Jon had to know. They needed to coordinate to bring Ned into the fold. He was not just some wandering corpse, he was their father, a lord of Winterfell whose wisdom might guide them in their final hours. They decided to do it quietly. With Arya leading the way, they made their way through less-traveled corridors. Ned kept his hood drawn, face turned toward the floor. Bran followed, pushing his chair with effort, his arms still trembling from the magic. At last, they reached a small private room near Sansa's chambers. Arya went to fetch her sister under some pretense, leaving Bran and Ned alone again. The torches on the wall flickered as though uncertain how to illuminate a scene so strange. Bran glanced up at the father he had conjured from beyond the grave. "Are you all right?" he ventured. Ned's lips curled into a sad, gentle smile. "I feel the north in my veins once more. The halls I walked in life are here, but everything is changed. I can sense that from the weight in the air, the sorrow in your eyes. So much has happened that I missed. I know not if I truly belong, but I will do what I can." A part of Bran wanted to fling his arms around him, bury his face against that familiar form, and never let go. But he didn't, because he wasn't a child anymore, not truly. He was the three-eyed raven, burdened with knowledge and power that set him apart. Still, beneath all that, he was also Bran, the boy who had lost his father so long ago. Then the door opened and Sansa entered, her face aglow with questions, her posture regal as it always was now. "Arya insisted I come," she said. She stopped mid-sentence as she caught sight of the hooded figure, her blue eyes narrowing. "What is this?" She glanced sharply at Bran, expecting an explanation. Before he could speak, Ned lowered his hood. The shock that crossed Sansa's face was profound. She staggered as though hit by an invisible blow, nearly losing her footing. Arya stepped in, steadying her. Sansa's eyes swept over Ned's features. In them, she saw a memory she had once cherished and lost, the father who had guided her gently, who had tried to protect her from the cruel world of politics and bloodshed. A father whose head had been taken by the Lannisters. She said nothing at first. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Tears rushed to fill her eyes. She was Lady of Winterfell now, yet in that moment she was just a daughter who had longed for her father's protection. Slowly she approached him, each step measured. Then, as if some dam broke, she rushed forward and he caught her as gently as he had caught Arya. She pressed her face against his chest, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. Ned closed his eyes, arms wrapped around his daughter. It felt like an eternity before Sansa finally pulled away, gazing up at him with a mixture of awe and dread. How, she asked hoarsely. I saw them take your head. This can't be. Bran's heart wrenched. His bones were returned to us, he said quietly. That was all we had? And I used an ancient rite. He lowered his gaze. I wanted to bring him back. We need him. Sansa was trembling. This is monstrous, she said, even as tears coursed down her cheeks. Or perhaps a miracle. I don't know. Ned's voice came softly. Sansa, child, I wish I had been here to spare you the pain you endured. If this is monstrous, I understand your fear. But I can promise you, my mind is my own. My heart is my own, or what remains of it. If I can help you through the days to come, I will. Sansa wiped her tears. It is good to see you. Stranger than any dream, but good. She leaned into him again, as if reassuring herself that he was truly there. There is so much that has happened, she whispered. You would not believe how the world has changed. Ned brushed a hand gently over her hair. Tell me or show me. I will learn. Arya spoke up, her voice still tinged with tears but steadier now. We can't keep him hidden forever. But we have to be careful who sees him. People will think we're dabbling in black magic. Bran nodded. We are. But it's magic for a reason. We fight the greatest evil that ever was. We have no choice. Sansa swallowed. Jon must know. He's out by the battlements, overseeing the defenses. Let me fetch him. But be ready. It will be a shock to him, perhaps even more than it was to me. He loved you so fiercely, father. Ned's expression softened. He was my son, too, in every way that mattered, though his name was Snow. Sansa gave a trembling nod, glancing at Arya to join her. The two sisters left to retrieve their brother, leaving Bran and Ned alone once more. Silence pressed in. Bran's mind was a whirl with images, the approaching hordes of the dead, the battered defenders preparing for the final battle, the father who had returned from the crypt. The moment was bittersweet, infused with hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Ned finally broke the hush. Are you certain of victory against the White Walkers, Bran? Bran exhaled. No, I'm not certain of anything. I only know that if we do not try, all will be lost. But your presence, you can inspire them. You can lead. We might stand a chance. A wry half-smile flickered on Ned's lips, though sorrow lurked behind his eyes. Then let it be so. The last stand of Eddard Stark, if that is what it takes. They sat in uneasy quiet until the door opened again. This time, Jon Snow walked in, his hair flecked with frost, exhaustion etched into his face. Arya and Sansa followed close behind. Jon was speaking as he entered, something about shifting the cavalry to the left flank. But then he saw Ned, and his words faltered. The color drained from his cheeks. He stared at the hooded figure who raised his head to meet Jon's gaze. Father, Jon whispered. His eyes flicked to Sansa, searching for reassurance, and then back to the figure before him. Ned stepped forward, hood sliding off. The bond between them was palpable, forged in a lifetime of quiet respect and deep love. Jon's face contorted with emotion, tears threatening to spill. He had always yearned for his father's approval, always lived under the shadow of his bastard status. To see Eddard Stark standing there, once taken by death but now returned, shattered his composure. Jon sank to his knees, head bowed. He was no longer the king in the north at that moment, no longer the Targaryen heir. He was just a son kneeling before the man he loved like no other. Ned rested a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Rise, my boy," he said gently, his voice quavering with emotion. "Stand tall. You have carried burdens far greater than any man should." Jon looked up, tears streaking his face. I failed you, couldn't save you. His voice broke. Ned leaned down, pulling Jon to his feet. You did not fail me. You have honored this family in ways I can only imagine. Sansa and Arya have told me of all you've done, of all you've faced. He paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. They say you found out the truth of your birth? Jon's gaze flicked uncertainly to Sansa, who nodded her encouragement. Taking a shaky breath, Jon met Ned's eyes. I am not your bastard son, he murmured. I am the child of your sister, Lyanna, and Rhaegar Targaryen. You raised me as your own to protect me. Ned's face grew pained. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Yes, I recall now, though the memories come as from a distance. I swore to your mother I would keep you safe. I would protect you from Robert's wrath. That promise was the last thing I could give her. And I am glad you have learned the truth, though it burdens you with new duties. Jon pressed his lips together, tears trembling on his lashes. I never wanted the crown. All I wanted was to protect our people, the same way you always taught me. Ned nodded. I know. A man does not always choose his destiny, but I have faith you will do what's right. Then, as if remembering the urgency of the moment, he straightened. Now the North stands upon the brink. We must gather every sword, every drop of courage. Show me what must be done. The others exchanged glances. Sansa cleared her throat, composing herself. We have not much time. We expect the enemy within a day's march. Our lines are forming on the fields beyond the walls. We have trenches dug, spikes set, and dragon glass weapons for the foot soldiers. The dragons, Daenerys's dragons, will patrol the skies. But the Night King, she swallowed. He rides a dragon of his own now, an undead beast with frost and blue flame. A flicker of shock passed through Ned's eyes. Truly? A dragon turned by the enemy? Arya nodded, face grim. We saw it ourselves. It's like nothing else. Blue fire that can bring down a wall. Jon rubbed at his brow, weariness etched in every line of his face. We do our best, but we're outnumbered. We have only one night left to prepare. Everyone is on edge. If they see you, Father, it might spark panic or hope. I'm not sure which. But if it is truly you, if your heart is still loyal to the living, then your presence could rally the North like nothing else. Ned regarded them one by one, taking in the magnitude of what he had returned to. I stand with you. I will do whatever is required. Whether men call it a sin or a salvation, my being here changes nothing of my loyalty. I am Ned Stark. Winterfell is my home, and I will defend it. A wave of relief and gratitude washed over the siblings. Bran quietly watched, his thoughts lingering on the unknown consequences of this resurrection. The old magic was often fickle, dangerous, with costs that revealed themselves only in time. But for now, the presence of Ned Stark brought hope. They decided then and there that they would reveal Ned's return to a small circle of trusted allies first. The Lords of the North, whose loyalty to House Stark ran deep. Tyrion Lannister was here too, allied with Daenerys. He would no doubt have 1,000 questions about necromancy. The Hound, the remaining Knights of the Vale, perhaps even Ser Davos. Each had a part to play. The War Council was to convene at midday. Sansa agreed to carefully orchestrate Ned's entrance. There was no way to predict the reaction, but at least the lords loyal to Winterfell would be more likely to accept the return of their beloved Warden of the North than to revolt in horror. But word spread quickly in Winterfell, no matter how they tried to keep it quiet. Whispers of a hooded figure in the halls, standing tall like a Stark of old, passed from guard to guard. By the time they reached the great doors of the council chamber, a hush had fallen over the castle as if a collective breath was held by every soul within the walls. Snow swirled through the courtyard. The dull clang of the blacksmith's hammer paused. Soldiers waiting for their midday meal murmured rumors to one another, gazing at the closed doors where they knew something momentous was happening. Inside the council chamber, the air was thick with tension. The lords and knights stood around a rough table that displayed a map of the north. Candles burned low, their light dancing on the surface of battered wood. At the head of the table stood Jon, Daenerys Targaryen at his side, Tyrion a step behind her. Arya, Sansa, and Bran were arranged in a half-circle, faces stern. Grey Worm stood near the door, unwavering. Ser Brienne of Tarth, Podrick Payne, and others lined the walls, each curious about the sudden secrecy that had drawn them here. Sansa nodded to the guards. They opened the side door and Ned Stark stepped in, cloak draped around his shoulders. He pulled back his hood, revealing his face. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Some men stepped back as if confronted by an apparition. A few reached reflexively for their swords, uncertain whether to shout or pray. Tyrion's eyes went wide in outright astonishment. Daenerys frowned, lips parting. For a long, pulsing moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft crackling of candles. Then Jon took a step forward, gesturing gently as if calming a spooked horse. "This is the Eddard Stark," he said, voice trembling with emotion. "Returned to us by means beyond our understanding." A storm of shocked murmurs erupted. Some looked at Jon as though he were mad. Others pressed forward to see if their eyes deceived them. Lord Royce of the Vale pressed his knuckles against the table, brow furrowed. Ser Davos parted his lips in silent surprise. Gilly and Sam, standing near the back, clutched each other's hands, fear and fascination etched in their faces. Ned's voice cut through the turmoil. "I understand your fear," he said. "Most of you knew me. Some of you fought alongside me or served in the north when I was warden. I can only say that I have been called back to defend our home. I am not here to sow discord or to claim any right. If you do not believe me, I understand. But the army of the dead is nearly upon us, and I will stand with Winterfell, living or dead." Something in his measured tone, the calm authority that had once commanded armies in Robert's rebellion, lent weight to his words. Men who had drawn swords reluctantly sheathed them. Lord Glover, pale-faced, managed to whisper, "My lord. If it truly is you, then we are glad beyond words." Daenerys stepped forward, eyes narrowing slightly, though not in malice. More in intellectual curiosity. "I have heard of dark arts that raise corpses," she said, her voice echoing in the hushed hall. "The White Walkers do it to create whites. Yet you do not seem mindless, Lord Stark." Ned inclined his head respectfully. "You are correct to be wary, your grace. I am not a white. There is another magic in the north, older than men, older than the Targaryen dragons. My son Bran wielded it, though at great risk to himself. I am no one's puppet. My will is my own." Tyrion licked his lips, his mind clearly racing with questions. "This is the unprecedented." He turned to Bran. "You did this? How?" Bran's voice was soft. "Through the old gods. Through the heart tree's power which flows in my blood. I used a rite I discovered in ancient texts. It allowed me to reach across the veil and call him forth." The dwarf's eyebrows shot upward. "I must hope that the cost is not too high." Bran's expression was unreadable. "We'll see." Jon cleared his throat, a note of urgency returning. "We cannot linger on the impossible. The army of the dead will be here soon. Let us prepare." A murmur of agreement rose. The shock slowly began to give way to practicality. Swords needed forging, positions needed manning, and the presence of Eddard Stark, miraculous or not, was one more boon in their desperate struggle. Men looked to Ned with a mixture of awe and reverence, recalling the honor he once embodied. Worries and superstitions lingered, but the day of reckoning was too close to indulge them. Every able body would be needed, whether it came from a crypt or from across the narrow sea. Ned stood by Jon's side as they laid out battle plans. The older man's knowledge of northern terrain, of possible fallback routes and choke points, was invaluable. Tyrion weighed in with tactical suggestions, Brienne and Ser Davos contributed their insights, and Daenerys confirmed the role her dragons would play. There was quiet agreement that if the Night King showed himself astride the undead dragon, they would need to unite their strongest forces, dragons, dire wolves, and any Valyrian steel that could be spared to confront him directly. All the while, Ned listened, nodding, at times asking for clarification about modern details, forces from Dorne, the Ironborn led by Theon Greyjoy, the Targaryen alliance. Now and then he glanced at his children, sorrow etched in his gaze. The changes in them, the losses they had endured, weighed heavily on him. But there was also pride, especially in Jon, who had risen from bastard of Winterfell to king in the north and beyond. When the meeting ended, each lord and knight filed out with determined strides. The faint smell of fear clung to the air, but so did resolve. The dead marched closer, and Winterfell would not yield without a fight. Those who lingered gave respectful bows to Ned Stark, uncertain whether to call him my lord or something else, but choosing courtesy over doubt. Ned bore their stares with quiet dignity. Finally, the chamber emptied, leaving only the Starks, Daenerys, and Tyrion. Jon exhaled slowly, massaging the back of his neck. "We have hours left, perhaps less. Every man must be at his post by nightfall." Daenerys studied Ned with a pensive expression. "Whatever magic brought you here, I am grateful for another ally. The people believe in your name. That might steady their nerves in this final hour." Ned offered a small bow. "Thank you, your grace. I am ready to serve as I can." Tyrion glanced from one face to another. Well, I can certainly say this day has taken a turn I never expected. Then his tone sobered. We must make the best use of every resource. If people see Lord Stark on the battlements, calm and commanding, it will reassure them. Perhaps that is our first move. They agreed to that plan. There was no point in hiding Ned away. The rumors had already spread, and a quiet unveiling would do more harm than good. Instead, Ned Stark would walk the ramparts, speak to the men, and share whatever words of encouragement he could muster. Jon would walk beside him, confirming that yes, this was indeed his father, not some malevolent specter. As the group dispersed, Ned halted a moment, glancing at Bran. "Will you be safe?" he asked softly, as if the father in him could not help but worry. "That magic you used, are you certain it has not harmed you?" Bran offered a faint, sad smile. "I'm changed already, father. Being the three-eyed raven did that. There is little more that can harm me than what has already been done. But yes, I will be careful." Ned nodded, a shadow flickering in his eyes. "I would never have wished for you to bear such burdens." Bran met his gaze. "I know, but this is the world we have." A silence passed between them, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Then Ned turned away, cloak swirling at his heels, and joined Jon in the corridor. Arya and Sansa fell in step, flanking him. They made their way through the corridors of Winterfell, ascending the spiral steps that led to the battlements. Soldiers and servants paused to stare openly as the small procession passed. Some gasped, some crossed themselves, as though warding off evil, but others bowed, tears of gratitude shining in their eyes. For the memory of Eddard Stark had never truly died in the hearts of the North. Atop the ramparts, a crisp wind stirred Ned's hair. He looked out over the snowy fields where ranks of men and women were training or finalizing fortifications. They were as prepared as they could be, but fear simmered in every corner of the courtyard. The knowledge of what approached could not be stifled. A hush fell over the ramparts as word passed along that Ned Stark was here. Men and women flocked to catch a glimpse, some pressing forward with disbelief, others dropping to a knee out of reflexive respect. Ned stood tall, his posture unwavering against the icy gusts. Jon watched, his own eyes lined with unshed tears. The figure of Eddard Stark next to him looked exactly as he had remembered, slightly older, but still carrying the steadfastness that had once ruled these walls. Then Ned raised his voice, carrying it across the parapets. "Men and women of the North," he called, his tone firm yet resonant with warmth. "I am Ned Stark. I was taken from you by treachery, but now I stand by your side once more. We face an enemy that threatens all our lives. There can be no doubt, no hesitation. We must fight with all our hearts or see our world end in darkness." A ripple of shock and awe washed through the crowd. But then a roar of approval sounded, some mixture of confusion, fear, and fierce loyalty. The name Ned Stark was murmured in 100 voices, some raising fists or spears. Indeed, no matter how impossibly he had returned, the sight of him filled the defenders with renewed courage. For if Ned Stark could come back from the grave to fight, perhaps the living had a chance. Perhaps not all hope was lost. Jon placed a hand on his father's shoulder, gently guiding him along the length of the wall. Here and there, Ned stopped to speak with archers or crossbowmen, offering a quiet word of encouragement. He recognized a few older men who had served in his time, and they wept to see him once more. He recognized the old blacksmith who had once hammered out steel for House Stark's guards, now wrinkled with age. The man nearly collapsed upon seeing Ned, but Ned steadied him with a calm assurance. For a little while, it seemed as though the gloom lifted. The presence of Ned Stark among them was like a beacon in the snowy gray half-light. Men remembered their oaths, women found new resolve, and even the children running messages looked upon him with wide, hopeful eyes. But the day rushed on. As the sun tilted westward, the chill in the air grew sharper. Scouts returned with dark reports. The White Walkers had been seen on the horizon, a vast horde of whites behind them. The Night King's approach was imminent. The final stand at Winterfell would begin sooner than any had hoped. And so, as dusk settled, the castle braced for war. Torches flared along the walls, shadows dancing ominously. Warhorns sounded, summoning every fighter to their assigned positions. The clang of steel on steel rang out as last-minute checks were made, and the smoke of countless fires drifted into the air. Outside the walls, the trenches were set ablaze, waiting to be lit at the right moment. ring upon ring of sharpened stakes and earthen barriers. Ned Stark stood atop the gatehouse, gazing out into the twilight. Jon stood beside him, ghost at his feet. Sansa and Arya were on the walls, each preparing in their own way. Bran sat in the courtyard, near the heart tree that gave him power, ready to warg into ravens or any creature that might give them eyes across the battlefield. Daenerys and her dragons circled overhead, preparing to strike from the sky. Tyrion, Ser Davos, and others coordinated the foot soldiers. In the quiet lull before the storm, Ned found himself alone for a moment, leaning on the parapet. He gazed down at the courtyard, where he could see the statue of a direwolf carved into the stone. Memories of his old life fluttered through his mind. Teaching Bran archery, sparring with Robb, guiding Sansa's steps at a feast, ruffling Arya's hair. Those days seemed so long ago. And now he was here, an echo made flesh, about to face an evil older than any petty king's war. He clasped his hands together, breathing the cold air. "Let it be enough," he murmured. Then he felt a presence beside him. "Jon." Jon's expression was solemn. "We're about to face the dead, father," he said softly. "We may not see another dawn." Ned turned to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then we face them with honor. We do not flee, we do not yield. We are Starks, and though we may have different names, different paths, we stand together. That is enough." Jon nodded, swallowing hard. "I have always wanted to fight beside you," he said. "I only wish—" He didn't finish the thought. Perhaps he wished Ned had never died, or that the threat was not so dire. Perhaps he yearned for the chance to share simpler moments. But there was no time. The horns sounded from the watchtower, long and low, echoing across the battlements. A chill wind gusted, carrying a distant moan. The dead had arrived. Ned looked out, seeing movement in the darkness beyond the trenches. The silhouettes of thousands upon thousands of whites pressed against the horizon like a living sea of bones and rags. Icy blue eyes glinted in the shadows. Mounted upon skeletal horses, the White Walkers loomed, brandishing spears of ice. Overhead, a shape passed across the dim sky, a dragon wreathed in unnatural cold flame, guided by the Night King himself. Jon's jaw tightened. "They're here." Ned gave a single nod. "May the old gods protect us," he whispered. "But if they do not, we shall protect each other." With that, the bells of Winterfell tolled, and the last stand began. The archers ignited their arrows, letting them fly into the oncoming mass. The trenches were lit in a great ring of flame, momentarily halting the advance of the dead. From above, the roar of dragons split the night. Winterfell's defenders braced themselves, hearts pounding, breath steaming in the cold. As the whites pressed closer, some toppling into the flames, others crawling over their scorched comrades, Ned Stark drew a borrowed sword. Its edge gleamed orange in the firelight. He could feel a warmth in his chest, the thrum of life or the echo of it surging through him. To his right, Jon raised Longclaw and Ghost snarled. All along the walls, men shouted and the war cry rose into the black sky. Death came in a tide of snarls and grasping hands, but the living met it with steel and dragon fire. Amid the chaos, Ned Stark, once put to rest, stood firm at the battlements of Winterfell, determined to hold the line that he had so often pledged to defend. As the memory of who he once was merged with the reality of what he had become, he fought for the future of his children and the kingdom he loved. Whether living or dead, no matter the cost, he would defend his home one final time against the darkness that threatened to swallow them all. Darkness swept across the fields like an immense, writhing beast, its backbone formed by countless silhouettes of the dead. A chorus of growls, rattles, and unearthly hisses accompanied their approach. The trenches flared around Winterfell's outer perimeter, wreathing the night in flames, while archers loosed arrow after arrow into the mass of whites. No matter how many collapsed, another wave followed, spurred on by an implacable force that knew neither fear nor fatigue. The defenders, hearts pounding, braced themselves for a siege like no other. Atop the ramparts, Ned Stark, a figure from Winterfell's storied past, held a borrowed blade as though it were an extension of his arm. He might have been a revenant resurrected by Bran's power, yet in this moment he was more alive than any memory. A primal roar pulled his attention skyward. One of Daenerys's dragons soared overhead, spitting an arc of flame that crashed into the ranks of the undead, igniting them in chaotic bursts of orange. Another shriek answered, the Night King's frostbound beast, its wings beating like the thunder of an oncoming storm. Even at a distance, one could see blue light searing through its open jaws. The living had never faced so dire a threat, and Ned could only marvel at how the world had changed since his time. Dragons, both living and undead, were a reality now, tangling in the air like immense, scaled nightmares. He felt a steady presence at his side, Jon Snow. The man who was once his presumed bastard son now wore an unmistakable air of command. Longclaw flashed with each deflection of an undead hand reaching over the stone battlements. More and more wights began to pile against the fire-filled trenches, forming grisly bridges of charred bodies so that yet more could clamber across. The defenders on the walls fired volley after volley of flaming arrows, each strike illuminating the night. The stench of burning flesh turned the cold wind foul, but there was no time for revulsion. Winterfell's archers had trained for this moment for days. Now it was upon them, and there was no room for error. "They're going to breach the trenches," Jon muttered, voice taut, the wind snatching away the condensation of his breath. "Light them faster." A horn blast signaled from below. Men and women with torches rushed to the outer lines, tossing flames onto the pitch-soaked barriers. Even more fire flared, blazing hotter, higher, forming a ring of defense that cast dancing shadows on the snow. For a moment, the oncoming wights faltered, hammered by that curtain of fire. Above them, Daenerys, astride Drogon, spewed more flame into the largest pockets of dead. Under normal circumstances, that conflagration would have repelled any living army. But these were not the living. The wights screamed as they burned, staggering forward without regard for their own annihilation, until their numbers threatened to extinguish the flames by sheer weight of corpses. Ned could see the anguish in Jon's eyes. This would be a close, desperate struggle, and they all knew it. There was no easy salvation. Yet Ned had not come back to witness despair. He gripped Jon's shoulder. "Hold them off as long as you can," he said, struggling to sound calm over the frenzied din below. "We must keep the courtyard as our fallback. If they breach us here, it will be a slaughter." Jon nodded. "Agreed," he said. "Father?" He hesitated, perhaps still grappling with the strangeness of addressing Ned in the flesh. "Stay with me. We can lead them better if we stand together." Ned set his jaw. "Aye. We stand together." He spared a quick glance along the ramparts to where Sansa and Arya worked in tandem. Sansa's gaze swept over the lines, her posture rigid, her face pale as she relayed orders to messengers scurrying across the wall. Arya moved among the ranks of archers and spearmen, every bit the seasoned fighter, offering succinct pointers or stepping in to take a lethal shot herself. Now and then, Ned caught a glimpse of the youngest version of her he remembered, the child of boundless energy, bent on learning swordplay. But that child was gone, replaced by a lethal, graceful presence. He felt pride and sorrow in the same heartbeat. Had he never died, would Arya have needed to become this? Another wave of shrieks came from the darkness. The wights pressed forward again, surging against the flames. Their numbers were unholy. Bran had warned them all. The Night King brought with him the gathered dead from every battlefield in the north, every burial ground across the haunted territories. Thousands upon thousands answered his call. Even if only a portion had made it to Winterfell, that portion alone was enough to threaten the castle's defenses. A deafening bellow soared across the skies. Regal, the green dragon, unleashed a torrent of flame near the left flank, sending a tide of wights scattering. Beneath that onslaught, cavalry from the Vale surged, galloping to cut down stragglers that had managed to break past the trenches. On the right flank, the Unsullied, led by Grey Worm, formed tight ranks, their spears bristling with dragoglass tips. From his vantage, Ned noted their discipline, recalling from stories how the Unsullied were the most elite infantry in the world. Tonight, they faced an enemy that felt no pain or fear, but the Unsullied line held like a steel barrier, punishing every wight that crested the charnel ramp. Thunder boomed across the battlefield. Or was it the flap of massive wings? Somewhere out of sight, the Night King's draconic mount howled again. A spasm of dread rippled through the defenders. Then, from the far side of the ring of fire, a swarm of wights pressed forward, many hurling themselves mindlessly into the flames, piling up until some among them could scale the bodies and push into the ring itself. The defenders' arrows and spears cut them down in droves, but more always came. It was an unending tide, as though the earth itself spewed forth corpses to devour the living. Suddenly, a large portion of the trench flames sputtered under the relentless press of bodies. The ring of fire there dimmed, no longer able to burn at full strength. White spilled over the embers and poured toward the walls, teeth bared, eyes glowing with that eerie blue. A cry rose from the watchers on the ramparts. They're through. They're through on the east side. Jon cursed under his breath. Sound the horn, get reinforcements. He sprinted along the battlements, calling for anyone with spare men to shore up the breach. Ned followed, sword in hand, adrenaline surging through him. The undead had come for Winterfell, but they would not have it without a fight. Below, the defenders swarmed to meet the incursion. Lines of northern soldiers and Vale Knights pressed shoulder to shoulder. A few of the Night's Watch, loyal to Jon, joined the fray, Blackcloak swirling. The fight degenerated into savage, close-quarters slaughter. The Whites raked and bit with bestial fury, many in partial states of decay. Some wore the remnants of old battle gear, bits of rusted chain or tattered tunics, but all were equally relentless. Ned, standing above, recognized the glint of metal that might have once belonged to House Stark men, or House Bolton, or House Manderley. Now the dead wore them indiscriminately, pawns in the Night King's unstoppable host. It was a reminder that the differences which once divided the living meant nothing in death. And so the tide rose. Inside the castle walls, Daenerys landed Drogon for an instant, dropping off some of her Dothraki riders who dismounted at speed to defend the gate. The great black dragon flapped back into the sky, roiling flame across the plains. The Dothraki who had survived earlier skirmishes clashed with the Whites now flooding over the battered trenches. Their rocks gleamed with dragonglass edges, cutting down swaths of undead. But even their ferocity risked being overwhelmed. Just then, a new cry erupted from watchers on the upper walls. "Giants!" someone shouted. Ned whirled to look. Emerging from the gloom beyond the lines, a massive shape lurched forward. A dead giant, once a proud child of the free folk, now turned into a hulking wight. Its pale eyes glowed with otherworldly malevolence, and as it lumbered toward the ramparts, it bellowed a roar that reverberated in the defenders' chests. Smaller wights scrambled around its feet. Another giant followed, and another, each staggeringly big, each held in the Night King's thrall. Boulders and chunks of ice soared from their hands, smashing into stone walls, sending shards of mortar flying. Soldiers scattered. Some were crushed or thrown from the walls by the impact. Sansa ducked behind the crenellations. Arya barely managed to dodge a chunk of stone that smashed into the walkway, showering her with fragments. She rose, blood trickling from a cut on her temple, eyes blazing with determination. Ned's heart lurched to see his daughter in harm's way, but he had no illusions that she could be commanded to stay safe behind the lines. Each of them was needed out here, him included. One giant wight slammed its fist into the ring of burning trench, scattering flames and half-incinerated bodies. Then it stomped forward, forging a path for the smaller wights to flood in. Arrows rained down on it, many of them dragged through pitch to ignite on impact, but the giant lumbered on, roaring. Atop the battlements, Ned lifted a flaming spear from a nearby rack, aiming for the creature's head. He hurled it with all the strength he could muster in this resurrected body. It whistled through the air and embedded itself in the giant's shoulder instead. The wound burst into flame, but the giant howled and kept coming, swiping at the walls. Stone cracked. A portion of the battlements collapsed, sending men and women plummeting into the melee below. Jon cursed again, calling for the Scorpions' small siege weapons prepared on the ram. Parts. Several northern soldiers and dwarven blacksmiths had rigged them with dragonglass-tipped bolts. They struggled to load them quickly while White scaled the outer stone. One Scorpion unleashed a bolt that tore through the giant's chest, knocking it back. When it collapsed, it crushed a score of Whites beneath its bulk. Another giant, however, was already looming behind it, hurling debris at the defenders. The Scorpions fired again and again, but the threat seemed endless. Where one was brought down, more undead pressed in. Roaring skyward, regal dove from above, flame rolling off his scaled throat. The second white giant reeled, bathed in searing dragon fire, roaring in anguish as it disintegrated. But just then, a streak of hideous blue fire knifed across the sky. The undead dragon, answering the Night King's silent command, unleashed a torrent of icy flame. Regal screeched, attempting to bank away, but the edge of that freezing onslaught caught his flank. Ice crystals formed across his scales, cracks racing along the fragile barrier. Regal's roar turned shrill with pain. Dany, astride Drogon not far away, shouted in despair. From his vantage, Ned watched as Regal wobbled in the air, battered by that unnatural cold. Jon cried out, a hollow sound echoing in the roaring night. With a desperate twist, Regal flapped away, retreating from the lethal column of frost breath. The undead dragon soared in pursuit, but Drogon suddenly intercepted, releasing a massive gout of normal dragon fire that clashed with the cold torrent. Two dragons roared, one living, one undead, twisting around each other in the swirling darkness above the battlefield. It was an impossible dance, flame against ice, life against death. Below, all the while, the whites continued their assault. Arrows and spears only delayed them. Whole sections of Winterfell's outer walls now teemed with scrabbling undead. Ghoulish hands gripped at the parapets, pulling themselves up with nightmarish strength. The defenders engaged them in savage melee. Blades flashed, the ring of steel against bone and rotted flesh echoing through the battlements. Dragonglass weapons shattered a handful of whites, each kill spattering blackened iso that hissed against the stone. But the living had injuries too, some lethal, others crippling. The wounded screamed, mixing into the general cacophony. Ned found himself locked in combat with a pair of whites that clambered over the rampart near him. They wore the tattered uniforms of old Stark guards, perhaps men who had once served him in life. A painful twist gripped his heart, but he steeled himself. "Forgive me," he murmured, driving his sword through the chest of the first. Its eyes guttered out, body collapsing to the floor of the walkway. The second lunged, slashing with ragged nails. Ned pivoted, hooking his foot behind the creature's ankle, toppling it off balance. An archer behind him loosed an arrow and the white skull burst with black fluid, the eyes extinguished. A savage momentum filled Ned's limbs. He had not fought on a battlefield for years before his death. Yet, as he felt the flow of this resurrected body, memories of earlier wars surged back, the rebellion, the moment at the Tower of Joy, all the chaos that had shaped him. Though he was no longer truly mortal, the ring of steel in his hand and the knowledge that his children fought alongside him spurred him forward with renewed purpose. All across the courtyard, chaos reigned. The whites were pouring in from the breached trenches on the east side, and the defenders were forced to fall back slowly, yard by yard. The unsullied line pivoted to close the gap, forming a shielded wedge with disciplined precision. Grey Worm barked commands, and each spear thrust found its mark. Behind them, northern footmen launched crossbow bolts, while a group of Dothraki dashed forward to slash at the flanks of the undead. Bodies piled up, but with each wave of kills, more whites replaced the fallen. From the vantage of the walls, Ned saw a swirl of red hair. Tormund Giantsbane was roaring among the defenders, swinging a massive dragonglass-embedded axe, cursing the undead in the name of the free folk. A handful of wildlings fought at his side, their war cries as savage as the storm itself. They had once been enemies of the North, but not tonight. Now they bled as brothers. Ned's heart clenched with admiration for them and sorrow. He could see the frantic effort in every blow. They all knew it might not be enough. Another wave of shrieking whites scaled the battlements. Jon leaped forward to intercept them, joined by a handful of remaining knights of the Vale. Ned moved as well, blade flashing. The press of dead was so intense that movement became nearly impossible on the narrow walkway. The living had to fight at full extension, elbow to elbow, just to keep from being pushed over the edge. Yet still, a few men lost their footing and tumbled screaming into the courtyard, sometimes dragged down by multiple whites. A hush of horror would seize Ned's chest each time, but he could only keep fighting. His borrowed sword dripped with congealed blackness, and the tang of death clogged his nose. Somewhere to the north corner, Ned heard Arya's voice ring out, "Get away from her." She sprang onto a cluster of whites that had cornered a young soldier, slicing with precision. Her dagger was Valyrian steel, the blade she had used to dispatch threats beyond number. She moved like a specter, weaving between clawed hands, her face set in a determined scowl. A swirl of motion brought her in direct conflict with a tall white that swung a jagged blade. She ducked, pivoted, and jammed her dagger under its jaw. The creature collapsed with a strangled hiss. Another white leaped from behind, aiming to grab her around the waist, but she whirled, slicing it across the neck in a single fluid motion. Ned wanted to call out to warn her, but she was more than capable of defending herself now. An impossible pride mingled with heartbreak in his chest. He pressed on, hacking through the next wave of attackers. Yet, for every white cut down, 3 more seemed to climb the walls. Was there truly no end? Down in the courtyard, Sansa directed the next fallback. She had no skill for open battle with a sword, she had never been trained for it, but her composure and organizational mind were unshakable. She guided pockets of men and women to fall back behind barricades, dispatching messages to the Great Hall where the wounded were being carried by the dozens. Samwell Tarly was there, tending the injured alongside Gilly, tears brimming in his eyes. He tried to remain calm, to do what he could, but the surge of casualties was relentless. The horns blasted twice from the southern ramparts. Through the swirl of snow and ash, a new storm of black shapes soared overhead, flocks of ravens answering a silent command. The watchers on the wall glanced up to see them swirling in a great spiral pattern, and many recognized that this was Bran's signal. The three-eyed raven was at work. Ned could sense it in the air, a ripple of old magic stirring. Perhaps Bran saw it to glean the Night King's position or coordinate the dragon's flight path. Perhaps he was searching for a moment's advantage, some feint or weakness. Yet it was a fraught gamble. The Night King was cunning, any mistake could give him the upper hand. At that instant, as if to answer Bran's call, the ground beneath the eastern breach seemed to quiver. A low groan rattled the stones. Men shouted in alarm. Then a great crack echoed around the castle walls. The earth at the mouth of the breach buckled, collapsing into a deep pit. Whites toppled in, shrieking, and the defenders scrambled back. It seemed that the old tunnels beneath Winterfell, ancient crypts or drainage channels, had collapsed at Bran's prompting. The undead in that sector found themselves plunged into a chasm. For a few precious moments, the tide halted there, giving the living time to regroup. Jon seized the opportunity, waving his sword. "Fall back to the inner walls. Form ranks." His voice boomed across the chaos. Soldiers obeyed, retreating behind fresh fortifications, eager to seize any advantage, however brief. The same was mirrored along the southwestern corner, where the whites had pressed dangerously close to the gate. Ned glanced across at Jon, who nodded once. They had no illusions that this relief was permanent. The Night King had not yet revealed his full hand. And sure enough, a fresh wave of whites came crawling around the collapsed pit, skirting the edges. They never tired, never hesitated. As if to confirm the worst, a monstrous screech rent the sky. All eyes turned upward. The undead dragon soared above, exhaling that uncanny blue flame into the courtyard. Defenders scattered, some caught in the blaze, their screams lost as their bodies went rigid with frost. The flame struck the outer ramparts, turning stone white with cold and then shattering it in chunks. Men lost their footing, plunging to their deaths. The entire wall near the southwestern turret collapsed in a rain of ice and broken masonry. Ned pressed against the rampart, shielding himself from the debris. In that moment, he spied something in the flicker of torchlight, a figure clad in black, perched upon the highest vantage, staring down into Winterfell with eyes that gleamed an unearthly blue. The Night King. He stood at the undead dragon's side, having landed upon a broken tower. His face, pale and expressionless, betrayed no triumph, only cold certainty. A hush fell across the battlefield as though all living hearts recognized the presence of death incarnate. Ned fixed his gaze on the Night King, an ancient terror that even old Nan's stories never fully captured. So many had tried to end him, Jon, Dany, the forces of the living, and yet he endured, an embodiment of the long night. For a moment, Ned felt the chill inside his own undead flesh. Was this the true cost of summoning him back? To stand witness to the destruction of everything he loved? No. He refused that thought. He had not come back to fail. From the ramparts, Arya saw the Night King as well. She froze in place, eyes narrowing. She gripped her Valyrian steel dagger as though it were her lifeline. Nearby, a swirl of wind told them that a dragon soared overhead again, Drogon. Daenerys had spotted her foe. She urged the dragon to charge, but the Night King simply turned, lifting a hand. Drogon rained flame upon the tower, yet through the blinding column of heat, the silhouette of the Night King remained. When the fire cleared, he stood unscathed, dusting embers from his armor. An inhuman calm radiated from him. Then, with a single gesture, he unleashed a frost-laden gust. Drogon roared in pain, veering away. Dany clung to the saddle, cursing at the sight of the unstoppable creature below. Seizing that moment, the whites roared as if one entity and renewed their attack. They poured through the courtyard, climbing heaps of rubble where the southwestern wall had collapsed. Ned and Jon hurried down the ramparts to join the ground defense, each step precarious on the battered stone. Along the way, they passed pockets of men falling back under the unstoppable push of undead. The ring of steel on steel had become near constant now, undercut by the guttural howls of the undead. Once in the courtyard, Ned found the fighting even more desperate. Whites darted in from every angle, forcing the defenders to cluster in small circles, standing back to back. Ghost, bleeding from a gash in his flank, nonetheless tore into a group of undead, yanking them off a wounded soldier. Jon bashed aside another white with his pommel, pivoting to cut down a second. Ned joined him, the two swirling through the fray like men possessed. The reek of decay and ash clung to every breath. A huge shape loomed out of the gloom, a white giant that had circled around the castle. It stomped across the courtyard, swinging a crudely fashioned club that scattered defenders like dolls. Ned rushed forward, waving at the archers. Focus on it. Bring it down. Arrows peppered the giant's torso, some igniting in the process, but the creature was unstoppable. It barreled toward the great hall, smashing aside barricades. Soldiers flung themselves out of the way. Sansa, inside with the wounded, would be an easy target. Desperation welled in Ned's throat. Before he could act, a fierce cry resounded. Tormund Giantsbane charged the undead giant, hacking at its Achilles tendon with his dragonglass-embedded axe. The giant roared, stumbling. Grey Worm and 2 Unsullied hurled spears into its back. Slowly, like a collapsing tower, the monster fell with a crash that shook the courtyard. Whites scrambled away from the impact. Tormund roared in triumph, but that cry turned to alarm as smaller wights set upon him. Ned dashed in to help, his sword lashing with practiced aim. In tandem, they dispatched the undead around Tormund, but not without Tormund taking a slash across his brawny arm. The giant gave one last groan. Its eyes flared again, the Night King's magic refusing to let it die peacefully. Grey Worm, battered but resolute, leaped onto the giant's shoulder and drove his dragonglass spear into its skull. That final blow extinguished the glow in its eyes, and it collapsed fully, unmoving. Ned turned, panting, scanning the courtyard for signs of his family. Jon fought near the front gates, face streaked with blood and soot. Arya flitted across the rubble like a phantom, darting from kill to kill with effortless grace. He caught a glimpse of Sansa at the threshold of the great hall, guiding a cluster of injured men inside. He felt relief that she remained safe for the moment. But the courtyard itself was precarious at best. Everywhere, survivors battled for each breath, struggling to keep from being swarmed. Out of the corner of his eye, Ned saw the Night King gliding across the shattered walls, unhurried, as though confident in eventual victory. Snow swirled around him, and the ground where he walked seemed to frost over in his wake. A group of northern spearmen mustered their courage and charged. The Night King raised a hand. Frost coiled through the air, and the spearmen froze in place, their eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. They toppled in a wave of ice-crusted bodies. The Night King continued on as if dismissing them entirely, eyes fixed on something deeper within the castle. Bran. Ned felt the pull of paternal instinct so strongly it almost buckled his knees. He remembered what Jon had said about the Night King's goal. To erase the world of men's memory, to snuff out the living. And to do that, he sought Bran, who carried ancient knowledge within him as the three-eyed raven. If the Night King reached Bran, it might be over for all of them. He turned and caught Jon's eye, shouting through the din, "Bran!" he roared, pointing toward the Night King's inexorable path. Jon understood immediately. They pressed forward, cutting their way through the wights that flooded the courtyard, determined to intercept. But the throng was thick with undead. Each step had to be fought for. Shoulder to shoulder with Jon, Ned carved a path. Ghost bounded at their flank, teeth bared. Others joined the effort. Theon Greyjoy among them, face grim with resolve, brandishing a spear lance of dragonglass. Once a ward and uneasy foster in Ned's home, Theon had betrayed the Starks in a time of weakness. Yet here he stood, risking his life to defend them. The layers of guilt and redemption flickered across Theon's eyes. He gave Ned one stricken look, almost a plea for forgiveness. Ned, seeing that raw sincerity, gave a curt nod. In the chaos of battle that had to suffice, they pressed on, deeper into Winterfell. The courtyard near the entrance to the Godswood was now a battleground strewn with ice, blood, and shattered weapons. The old weirwood towered over the yard beyond, branches twisting against the gray sky. And there, beneath the arches that led into the Godswood, stood Bran Stark. His wheelchair was beside the trunk of the heart tree. He stared into the swirling ravens overhead, eyes milky with the trance of warging. Defenders in that area had formed a protective ring around him, commanded primarily by Mira Reed and a handful of others. Their faces were white with terror, for the wights were pushing in from every side. The Night King was not far now. He strode through the gloom, his pale armor reflecting the flicker of scattered torches. Theon and the small ring of protectors took up arms, determined to defend Bran to the last. Ned and Jon tried to get there, but the path was choked with swarming undead. Wights flung themselves at them, forcing them into a desperate circle of defense. Still in a partial warg state, Bran lifted his gaze. He saw the Night King, a silent silhouette at the edge of the Godswood. The ancient magic in Bran's veins trembled. He had tried to slow the dead with illusions, with whispered commands to the ravens, with the partial collapse of tunnels. But the Night King had come, unstoppable and relentless. If Bran fell, all was lost. Ned cut down another white, moving inch by inch toward Bran. He bellowed over the shrieks of the dead. "Bran, focus on me if you can." He had no idea if his voice carried over the carnage. Another white lunged, and Ned rammed his sword through its chest. A near miss. Had he not turned at that moment, the creature would have clawed out his throat. Behind them, a monstrous collision shook the battlements. Drogon and the undead dragon were locked in a savage aerial duel, passing low over the castle walls. The living dragon's roar split the night, accompanied by the shrieking death wail of the other. Their wings buffeted the ramparts, sending smaller bits of rubble flying. Daenerys clung to Drogon's spines, unleashing Dracarys again and again, but the undead dragon's icy flame battered them in return. The swirl of their battle cast flickering shadows across the courtyard like a ghostly strobe. Jon managed to break free of a pack of whites, pivoting to slash at those that clutched Ned's cloak. "We've got to get through," he shouted. The press of bodies was too dense. One white grabbed Ned's arm. He twisted it free, but another latched onto his leg. Jon rammed it with long claw, blackened fluid spraying across the flagstones. But more came. They had no choice but to fight tooth and claw for every step. Within the Godwood, Theon Greyjoy and his small band stood as the final barrier before Bran. Theon loosed arrow after arrow. Each found its mark, dropping white after white. But the horde pressed closer. As the Night King advanced, Theon's men rushed to meet him, hoping to slow him. Theon roared a challenge. It was courageous, perhaps foolish, but he refused to yield. His spear lunged for the Night King's chest, Dragoglass tip aimed to end the threat once and for all. But the Night King sidestepped with preternatural grace and seized the spear shaft, snapping it as if it were kindling. He grasped Theon's collar, ice radiating from his grip, and flung him aside. Theon crashed into a tree root, grimacing in pain. He tried to rise, only to find a shard of broken spear lodged in his thigh. Another man lunged at the Night King, sword held high, but the ancient foe caught the blade with one hand and froze it into a lattice of ice before backhanding the man into oblivion. One by one, the ring of defenders fell. The ground was strewn with them, their final stand an echo of bravery that would go unrecorded if the living lost. Bran, still in his warg trance, looked up at the Night King as he closed the distance. His expression was calm, resigned. Beyond the edges of the Godwood, Ned and Jon were still trapped in the swirling melee, only now nearing the archway. Two whites emerged from behind a broken statue, blocking the path. One swung a notched axe at Jon. He parried and Ned lunged to finish it off. Yet the seconds ticked by in a grim countdown. The Night King reached Bran. He stared down at the boy, milky eyes meeting those of icy blue. For a moment, time seemed to still. The winds hushed, the battle a blur of shapes and sounds behind them. Bran exhaled as if preparing himself for the final blow. Then the Night King reached out, hand outstretched, intending to grasp Bran by the throat or perhaps draw forth the spark of life itself. Suddenly, a flash of motion hurtled in from the side. Ned Stark, with a final burst of ferocious will, had forced himself through the last knots of whites. Bleeding from cuts on his arms and shoulders, he moved with the strength of a desperate father. His borrowed sword still gleamed with dark ichor. The Night King turned at the last instant, releasing a blast of cold that hit Ned like a crashing wave. Frost crackled across Ned's cloak, biting into his flesh. Agony shot through his chest. Had he been truly alive, it might have killed him instantly, but the strange half-life animating him staved off the worst. He grit his teeth, pushing through that lethal chill. He swung his sword at the Night King's side. The blade struck the being's armor with a dull clang. Cracks of ice spread across the metal, but it didn't shatter. The Night King spun inhumanly fast, striking Ned's forearm. Ned's fingers went numb and his sword clattered to the ground. For an instant, they locked gazes, Ned's dark gray eyes, the Night King's frigid ones. Hatred, ancient and impersonal, radiated from the other's stare. But Ned refused to break. Snarling, Jon slammed into the Night King from behind, swinging long claw in a descending arc. The Night King dodged, though not fast enough to avoid a glancing blow. Streaks of black ice shimmered where long claw contacted him. He whirled, unleashing a wave of frost at Jon. Jon managed to block it with the flat of his blade, though the impact shoved him back. Frigid crystals spread along the steel, and Jon's hands shook with the cold. Arya appeared from the shadows like a darting ghost, Valyrian dagger in hand. She dashed behind the Night King, poised to strike at his back. He sensed her approach, turning at an impossible angle, seizing her wrist with a crackling grip. Ice spread across her leather bracer, but she twisted, dropping her dagger from that hand to the other, just as she had done to dispatch the undead in previous encounters. The blade flashed up. The Night King snatched her second wrist before it could pierce him. A flicker of confusion rippled across Arya's face. She had counted on that feint. The Night King's chilling gaze studied her as though deciphering her trick. Then he slammed a palm into her chest, sending her flying across the godwood. She hit the base of a tree with a painful gasp, collapsing in a sprawl of fallen leaves. Ned and Jon both renewed their assault. The Night King caught Ned by the front of his cloak, hoisting him off his feet with monstrous strength. Frost roiled from his hand, encasing Ned's chest in razor-thin ice. Ned winced, losing all sensation in his limbs. Jon lunged from the side, but the Night King used Ned's body as a shield, forcing Jon to jerk back or risk impaling Ned. Then, in one swift motion, the Night King hurled Ned aside with a crash that shattered the brittle ice around him. Coughing, Ned rolled across the roots. Pain shot through him, a reminder that while he might not be fully alive, he could still be torn apart. He forced himself up to elbows, gasping. Across the way, Jon charged the Night King head-on, shouting. Longclaw clashed with the Night King's icy blade. Sparks of frost and steel danced in the air. It was a contest of raw will, with Jon mustering every ounce of strength. But the Night King's power was otherworldly, unbound by mortal limits. He parried with a speed that seemed to bend the laws of motion, driving Jon back step by step. On the ground, Theon tried to stand but collapsed again, the spear embedded in his thigh making every movement agonizing. Bran, he rasped, glancing over at the boy. Bran had awakened from his warg state, quietly observing the pitched struggle. A resolute calm seemed to settle over him, as though some final decision had been reached in his mind. Jon was hurled back by a savage blow. He landed hard, losing his grip on Longclaw. The sword clattered away. The Night King advanced, raising his blade, aiming to finish Jon. Gritting his teeth, Jon scrambled desperately on the ground. The unstoppable foe loomed above him, a specter of silent, ancient hate. Bran spoke. Stop. The Night King paused, turning his head toward Bran. Perhaps it was curiosity or some vestige of understanding that made him heed the word. Bran's eyes glimmered with a strange intensity, as though multiple timelines and memories converged behind them. The boy's voice was unexpectedly firm. You have come for me because I carry the memory of this world. But you do not understand. This place remembers. Winterfell remembers. The weirwood branches rustled in an unfelt wind. Snow spiraled overhead. The ground beneath the heart tree trembled. A faint glow seemed to emanate from the carved face in the ancient trunk. Ned, struggling to stand, felt a hum in the air, like the echo of the same power he had once used to call Ned back. The Night King pivoted fully to face Bran, stepping closer, blade lowered as though intrigued. From across the yard, Arya stirred, clutching her chest but forcing herself upright. Jon, still breathless, crawled toward Longclaw. Ned shook off the shards of ice clinging to him, staggering to his feet. He could see an eerie swirl of magic building around Bran, the same way he had sensed it in the Godswood days before. Bran reached out a hand, placing it on the heart tree's trunk. The rustling leaves hissed louder, though there was little wind. The Night King raised his free hand, perhaps to unleash a killing blast. In that instant, the power in the weirwood seemed to surge. The faint glow intensified, wrapping the clearing in a halo of pale greenish-white light that shimmered like starlight on snow. A series of illusions or memories flickered around them, scenes of ancient battles in the north, the first men fighting the White Walkers in the dawn of days, the children of the forest forging obsidian blades. Then other scenes, Bran's glimpses of Harhome, the fall of the Wall, Jon's birth at the Tower of Joy, Ned's final moments in King's Landing. The swirl of images was disorienting, as if time had cracked open for an instant, revealing the myriad threads that bound them. The Night King's eyes flickered. He was not swayed by sentiment, but something in this display made him hesitate. Perhaps it was a reflection of the same primordial forces that had birthed him eons ago. Bran's voice reverberated in the hush. This is what you cannot kill. The memory of what was and what might be. The living are more than flesh and bone, they carry the past within them. And I carry it still. With that, Bran's eyes rolled back in his head and the swirling illusions focused into a single beam of power that lanced out toward the Night King. It wasn't fire or lightning. It was something more abstract, like the pure force of memory, the intangible essence of every story, every life lived under the weirwood's watch. The Night King recoiled slightly, but not enough to fall. He raised his blade, trying to shatter the magic. Ned saw his opening. Summoning the last vestige of strength in his limbs, he rushed forward again, ignoring the crackle of ice in his muscles. Jon, too, lunged from the other side, longclaw in hand. Between them, they aimed to strike the Night King while he was partially distracted by Bran's onslaught. But the Night King jerked aside at the final moment. Jon's blade slashed the air, missing by a hair. Ned's borrowed sword hammered into the Night King's gauntlet, fracturing it but not delivering a killing blow. Frost energy exploded outward, hurling them both back once more. In the confusion, Arya sprang from behind the tree roots, Valyrian dagger raised. The Night King spun, anticipating her. He blocked her strike with his blade, sending sparks of ice scattering. But Arya was cunning. She used the momentum to pivot around him. The Night King's free hand shot out, aiming to freeze her at once, but Arya twisted like a leaf in the wind. She drew back, dagger passing from her left hand to her right in a move so quick it was almost imperceptible. She stabbed forward at his side, seeking a gap in his armor. But again, he read her intention. He had seen her do that trick once already. He caught her wrist, turning the dagger aside. A twist of his elbow battered her arm, threatening to break it. Arya grimaced. For a moment, it seemed he would break her limb altogether. But Ned, battered, broken, refusing to yield, caught the Night King's own arm. With inhuman will, he forced the Night King's grip away from Arya, even as shards of ice tore into his resurrected flesh. Now, Ned rasped, holding the Night King in place however briefly. Arya let the dagger drop from her twisted hand to her other palm. In that fraction of a heartbeat, she reversed her grip and drove the Valyrian steel into the Night King's chest. This time, it slid between the plates of his armor, piercing that icy heart. A soundless shockwave rippled through the godswood. The Night King's pale eyes widened. An expression of something akin to surprise etched across his frozen features. A brittle, crystalline crack spread from the dagger's point, threading across his torso like spiderweb. For one impossible moment, he stood rigid, no breath or cry escaping him. Then the cracks raced up his neck, across his chin, over his cheeks. Finally, the entire form of the Night King shattered into 1,000 shards of ice, dissolving into a swirl of glittering frost that scattered on the night wind. A sudden hush blanketed the courtyard, the entire castle, as though the storm itself had paused to witness this moment. Every wight in sight halted mid-lunge, quivering. Their eyes flickered once, then went dark. One by one, the undead collapsed where they stood, no longer animated by the Night King's will. A chain reaction of faint thuds and clatters rippled outward from the godswood to the far edges of Winterfell. Giants, wights, and abominations fell in unison. The entire unstoppable army was undone in the span of a heartbeat. Stunned defenders stared at the ground, half-dazed, as rotting corpses and monstrous forms slackened into heaps of inert flesh and bone. The monstrous siege ended not with a roar but with the soft hush of thousands of bodies hitting the snow. The wall of noise and chaos that had defined the night fell away, replaced by the crackle of lingering fires and the ragged breathing of the living. For a full 10 seconds, nobody spoke, as if not trusting their eyes. Then, a low cheer began to rise. It was a trembling, disbelieving sound at first, men and women too shocked to do more than murmur. It soon grew, rolling into a wave of exultation and relief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had destroyed the Night King and his horde. Winterfell still stood, battered and broken, but undefeated. Arya stood panting, dagger in hand, the shards of the Night King's demise sprinkling the ground around her feet. Her eyes flicked from the empty space to her father. Ned knelt, arms wrapped around his own torso where the ice had bitten deep. She rushed over, letting the dagger clatter. "Father!" She dropped to her knees beside him, voice shaking. Blood streaked her face, and she reached out with trembling hands, uncertain how to help him. Ned managed a small smile, though pain creased his features. He patted her arm. "You did it," he whispered, voice barely audible above the distant moans of the dying. "You ended him. I'm so proud of you." Jon scrambled over, battered and bleeding, but eyes alight with relief. He clasped Ned's shoulder, gazing in awe at Arya. Bran, still near the weirwood trunk, exhaled a ragged breath, his eyes returning to normal. The swirling aura around him faded. He caught Ned's gaze. A silent understanding passed between them. The vow they had shared to protect Winterfell was now fulfilled. Theon lay nearby, propped against a tree root, his leg wound still seeping blood. He stared in disbelief at the piles of undead that no longer moved. Is it over?" he rasped. Jon nodded, face streaked with tears he didn't try to hide. "It's done," he said quietly. "The Night King is gone." A wave of shouts and cheers carried from the courtyard beyond the godwood. Thousands of men and women realized that the Whites had collapsed. Grey Worm, Tormund, and the others stood among the piles of bodies, uncertain whether to grieve for their countless fallen or to rejoice in survival. The dragons overhead parted, Drogon with a thunderous flap and the undead dragon tumbling from the sky in a shower of decaying flesh, unbound from the Night King's magic. Daenerys circled overhead once, glimpsing the motionless Whites and the cheering defenders. Her tears of relief were lost in the wind as she guided Drogon to land gently in the courtyard. Within the godwood, Ned's strength was fading. The ice that had torn through him had left blackened lines across his torso, the energies of the Night King's power unraveling the magic that bound him to life. He coughed, trying to stay upright. Arya's eyes widened in alarm as she saw his flesh take on a deathly pallor. "No," she whispered. "No, stay with us." Jon's face contorted with anguish. He cradled Ned's shoulders, supporting him. "We can get help," Jon choked out. "We have healers, maybe magic, Melisandre might." Ned shook his head. "This body was borrowed from the grave," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "I've done what I was summoned to do. Perhaps that is enough." Bran wheeled closer, face pale, dark rings under his eyes. The strain of channeling such immense power had taken a toll. "Father, I'm sorry. I never wanted this to be your end. I thought we could, But Ned lifted a hand, resting it gently on Bran's. "You gave me a chance to stand with you once more, to fight for our home. Do not be sorry." He winced, coughing again. The edges of his form seemed to flicker as though the binding force that held him together was failing. The ice had ravaged him, and without the Night King's dark presence to oppose, the old magic was letting him slip away. Arya clung to him, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. "You can't go." She sounded small, like the child she once was. "We just got you back." Ned gently touched her hair. "My brave girl," he murmured. "You saved us all. There is no greater gift than that." Jon bowed his head, tears slipping down his face. "Father," he said, voice trembling, "you died once without us at your side. This time, we're here." Sansa arrived then, breath hitching as she saw the state of Ned. She had run from the great hall the moment she heard the cheering, desperate to find her family. Blood smeared her gown, though she appeared unhurt. She fell to her knees at Ned's side, speechless with grief. Ned looked upon them all, each face a testament to the trials they'd overcome, Sansa's quiet grace, Arya's fierceness, Jon's solemn resolve, Bran's distant wisdom. Theon lingered nearby, tears in his eyes, and others hovered in the background, uncertain whether to intrude upon this final moment. The battered old weirwood was silent witness. Ned's gaze rested on each child. "I did not think I'd see you grow," he whispered, forcing the words out. "Yet here you are, strong and noble. You have your mother's courage and the North in your bones." His voice wavered. "I am proud. So very proud." Arya clutched his hand. "Don't leave," she pleaded again, even as she felt his strength draining. Ned mustered a soft, sad smile. "I'll always be with you," he whispered. "The pack survives as long as you stand together." Bran lowered his head, tears falling silently. He could sense the old magic receding from Ned's form, the thread unspooling like an unraveling tapestry. They had stolen him from the crypt's peace for this single purpose, and now that purpose was fulfilled. A shudder ran through Ned. He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. The ice that marred his chest spread outward, but it wasn't the same menacing frost. It was a silent dissolution, the borrowed flesh returning to the stillness of death. The lines of black magic that had once bound him flickered and dimmed. Then, with one last soft breath, Eddard Stark slumped in his children's arms, his borrowed body limp. For a moment, no one spoke. The hush of finality draped over them like a mourning shroud. Then Sansa made a soft keening sound, tears pouring down her face. Arya held her father's lifeless hand, gently placing it over his chest. Jon bowed his head, shoulders shaking. Bran's eyes brimmed with grief, though he had seen this ending in his visions. Knowing it did not lessen the pain. They laid Ned's body at the base of the heart tree, the place from which Bran had first summoned him. Around them, the godwood was bright with torchlight and starlight alike. The memory of the ancient weirwoods enveloped them in a hush. Each sibling took a moment, laying a hand on Ned's cooling brow or whispering a final farewell. Behind them, men began to gather, drawn by the sense that something important had happened here. Tormund, Davos, Grey Worm, Gendry, Brienne. Each approached, quiet in the wake of victory. They saw the limp form of Ned Stark, recognized the heartbreak on the faces of the Stark children, and understood. This was the cost. A father returned to save them only to be lost again. Arya, tears drying on her cheeks, rose and faced the Watchers. She said nothing for a moment, then repeated quietly, "He died to protect us." Her voice echoed among the mossy trunks. That's who he always was. Jon squeezed his eyes shut, regaining composure. Then he turned to the onlookers. "We owe him," Jon said, voice rough with sorrow, "just as we owe every brave soul who fell this night. Their names will be remembered." Soft agreement rumbled through the gathering. The living had prevailed. Yet the cost was immense. The battered walls of Winterfell stood amid fields littered with the dead. The stench of smoke and charred flesh lingered in the frigid air. But the army of the dead was gone, the Night King's hold shattered. Dawn began to stain the eastern sky in faint purples and reds as though the world itself exhaled relief after the long night. One by one, survivors drifted away to tend to the wounded or begin the heartbreaking task of collecting the fallen. Daenerys, dismounting near the godwood, offered a solemn nod to Jon, tears in her eyes for the countless sacrifices. Tyrion hovered at her side, his usual clever words failing him in the face of so much loss. Brienne and Podrick moved off to help those in need, while Davos organized the remaining ranks. Ghost limped up, whining softly, nudging Jon's leg with concern. Finally, it was only the Starks and Theon who lingered around Ned's still form. The quiet was almost overwhelming after the frenzy of battle. Jon knelt by Ned again, carefully lifting him in his arms. "We'll take him to the crypts," Jon murmured. "He should rest where he belongs." Sansa wiped her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "This time, we'll see him to his place ourselves." Theon sniffed, bowing his head. "I'll help," he said. Jon nodded, letting Theon support Ned's legs. Arya and Sansa clutched each other's hands, following close. Bran, too, guided his wheelchair beside them, though his arms trembled with weariness. They made their way through the ruined castle, stepping over debris and the remains of wights that had collapsed into lifeless husks. Every soldier or servant they passed paused to bow their heads, an unspoken sign of respect for the man who had given them hope in the darkest hour. It was an eerie procession, candlelit by the earliest hints of sunrise. Once in the crypts, they descended the narrow stairs, the flickering torches revealing the solemn statues of long-dead Starks. The wind moaned softly through the stone corridors, carrying the echoes of the past. Jon and Theon carried Ned's body to the open sarcophagus that once held his remains. It was still askew from Bran's ritual, the heavy lid half pushed aside. Inside lay only dust and scraps of cloth that once wrapped the bones. Wordlessly, they laid Ned inside, arranging his limbs with a gentleness born of heartbreak. Then Sansa and Arya each placed a hand on his chest, tears slipping down their cheeks. Jon bowed his head, silent tears tracing the lines of soot and blood on his face. Bran gazed with distant sorrow, one hand resting on the stone lip. "We're back here again," Sansa whispered hoarsely, laying him to rest. Arya swallowed. "At least this time we can say goodbye," she said. "He knows we love him." Jon nodded, blinking away tears. "He died fighting for us, with us. No one can ever take that away." Bran's voice was soft. "The old gods received him once before. They will receive him again. And we will remember." Together, they slid the sarcophagus lid back into place, sealing Ned's borrowed flesh once more in the crypt of Winterfell. The rift created by Bran's desperate magic had been mended. The father they loved was gone, yet his presence lingered in every stone of the ancient castle. Even in the hush of the crypt, they felt it, the abiding memory of who Ned Stark was and what he had done for them all. They took a moment, heads bowed, letting the finality seep into their bones. Then, one by one, they turned and ascended from the crypt, leaving behind the stillness of stone. They emerged into a Winterfell forever changed. The morning light now fell on a courtyard heaped with the dead, but also filled with survivors tending to each other. Hope mingled with profound loss. This was the cost of victory in the Great War. In the days that followed, the North gathered its wounded and buried its fallen in mass pyres. For the first time in what felt like ages, the sun shone bright on Winterfell as if nature itself rejoiced that the long night had not swallowed the world. The battered walls were repaired stone by stone and the scorched trenches refilled. People spoke in hushed tones of how Eddard Stark had walked among them again. Some whispered of necromancy, others of a miracle. Most simply said that the Father of the North had returned for one last stand. Jon oversaw the rebuilding efforts, conferring with Daenerys about how to proceed with the rest of the realm. She had lost many unsullied Dothraki, and one of her dragons was gravely wounded, but both dragons survived. Tyrion worked with Sansa to organize supply lines, ensuring the North would recover from this devastation. Arya hunted stray pockets of leftover wights that had not fully collapsed, though they seemed mindless and easy to dispatch without the Night King's power. Bran sat in the Godswood often, communing with the weirwood, forging the path forward for a realm newly delivered from the dead. At the next solemn gathering in the Great Hall, the survivors feasted not in celebration but in remembrance. Bowls of hot stew and fresh-baked bread circulated among those who had endured the horrors. Daenerys, flanked by Grey Worm and Missandei, raised her cup in honor of the fallen. Jon spoke of the sacrifices made by so many houses, from Winterfell to the Vale, from the Reach to the Iron Islands. Tormund toasted the memory of those who fought like mad bastards so we might keep breathing. Tears glistened in the eyes of hardened warriors. When the time came, Sansa stood, voice quiet but resonant. "We owe a debt to my father, Ned Stark," she said. "A father to us all in spirit, who guided our steps in life and returned to guide us once more in death. Let us never forget what he taught us, that loyalty and honor are the pillars of the North. That we stand together, or we fall." Arya raised her cup, tears shining. Bran nodded solemnly from his seat, eyes reflecting centuries of knowledge. Jon, standing near Daenerys, closed his eyes in a moment of grief and gratitude. The hall erupted in murmured agreement, men and women tapping their cups in tribute, many openly weeping for the father of House Stark who had given them hope in their blackest hour. In the aftermath, the realm slowly began to mend. Letters were dispatched across the 7 kingdoms confirming that the dead threat was vanquished. Various lords emerged from hiding or from the edges of the conflict, offering to help restore what had been shattered. The question of who would sit upon the Iron Throne still lingered, but for the time being, the immediate crisis was over. One by one, houses realigned in the hope of forging peace. The Stark children often gathered in the Godwood, quietly reflecting on the swirl of events that had shaped them. Even after so much devastation, the red leaves fluttered in the breeze, the face carved in the trunk gazing silently at them all. Arya sometimes stood there, hand on the bark, remembering how she had tried to protect Ned from King's Landing's treachery in her own fantasies of childhood. Sansa walked beneath the branches, recalling the father who had taught her the bedrock of courtesy and compassion. Bran, in his chair, communed with the old gods, feeling Ned's presence echo in the roots of Winterfell's soil. Jon lingered on the outskirts, hand resting on Ghost's back, never fully at ease with the knowledge of his parentage, yet thankful that Ned had protected him all those years. Time passed. The smell of funeral pyres was replaced by the scent of fresh hay and the budding possibility of new life. The battered fortress took on a semblance of normalcy once more. The wounded slowly healed. Builders and smiths worked day and night to repair the keep. Summer might not come for some time, but at least the immediate winter storms felt less cruel without the specter of the army of the dead looming. Early one morning, Arya left her chamber before dawn. She slipped through the courtyard with her usual quiet agility. The sky was streaked with pale lavender, the hint of sunrise. She paused at the door to the crypts, uncertain whether to venture inside. A part of her heart rebelled at seeing her father's tomb again. But she needed closure. Gripping a lone torch, she descended the steps, breath misting in the cool subterranean air. She passed the statues of old kings in the north, ancient lords of House Stark. The flickering torchlight made their stone faces seem alive for an instant. At last, she came to Ned's final resting place. The coffin had been carefully resealed. Someone, Sansa, perhaps, or Jon, had placed a small bouquet of winter roses upon the lid. Arya set her torch in a bracket and stood there a moment, gazing at the cold stone. Her heart squeezed. She remembered pressing her ear to her father's chest when she was small, feeling his warmth and security. She remembered racing him across the courtyard or the soft comfort of his presence when nightmares had driven her from bed. That was another lifetime. Now she was grown, hardened by a world that had taken so much. But for a brief span of days, fate had given her father back, if only to say goodbye properly. She whispered thank you, her voice echoing against the stone walls. For coming back. For showing us who we are. She touched the top of the sarcophagus, the chill of its surface biting into her palm. I promise. I'll keep protecting them. Our family. You can rest now, father. Her torch flickered, casting dancing shadows. She thought she heard a soft sigh of wind through the crypt, but it might have been only her imagination. Perhaps it was Ned's ghost still watching over them. The moment passed and she turned away, collecting the torch. As she made her way up the stairs, a single tear rolled down her cheek, but her expression was resolute. She was Arya Stark of Winterfell, carrying her father's memory in every step forward. Above, the dawn broke fully, bathing Winterfell's courtyard in pale gold. It was a bruised and weary place, scarred by the greatest battle in living memory, but alive. Children scavenged for arrowheads or helped carry fresh water. Blacksmiths hammered broken swords into new shapes. Men walked the walls with eyes that had seen the darkest horrors and survived. The banners of House Stark fluttered in the breeze, a testament to resilience. Sansa, standing on the ramparts that morning, gazed east toward the rising sun. She remembered the day their father had been taken from them so many years ago and how it had felt as if the sun would never shine the same again. And yet here it was, a new dawn. The memory of Ned's calm presence guided her in every diplomatic decision, every plan to keep the North strong. She placed her hands on the cold stone, listening to the soft hum of rebuilding that drifted on the wind. Perhaps that was what Ned would have wanted, for them to move forward, never forgetting who they were. Jon patrolled the walls too. He paused beside Sansa, exchanging a brief, fond look. "You're up early," he said. She nodded. "I wanted to see the sunrise," she replied. Her gaze shifted across the courtyard. "And to remember him." Jon placed a hand on her shoulder. "He'll never really be gone," he said. "Not from us." She breathed in the crisp air. "Yes, I know." Within the godwood, Bran sat by the pool, the reflection of the heart tree shimmering in the water. He had warged into a raven earlier, soaring around the castle grounds, observing the newly peaceful land. Now, in his own body, he traced a pattern on the ground, reminiscent of the runes that had once called Ned forth. He had no intention of summoning the dead again. The cost was too high, the final heartbreak too great. But he wanted to honor the link they had shared, father and son, across the boundary between life and death. Bran placed a hand on the weirwood trunk. Its carved face seemed almost softened by the morning light. "Thank you," he whispered. He sensed no words in reply, but a gentle stirring of leaves brought him comfort. It was as if the old gods themselves acknowledged the deed that had saved Winterfell. In time, the realm would speak of the long night and how House Stark led the living to triumph. They would speak of Arya's valiant strike, Jon's unwavering leadership, Daenerys's dragonfire, and the alliance of so many who had once been enemies. But an especially cherished tale, told in hushed tones in the North's halls, was the story of Eddard Stark's return. For a single winter's night, he strode the ramparts of Winterfell again. He fought with the old honor, forging a final stand against the dead. And though he left them once more, he left having witnessed the resilience of his children, the survival of the North, and the dawn's victory over darkness. Those who had seen him on the walls swore they felt the warmth of his presence even after he was gone, as though some part of him remained in the stones of Winterfell itself. And so the North carried on, guided by the memory of its beloved lord. The living would rebuild, reforge alliances, and shape a future free from the terror of the White Walkers. Yet through every gentle breeze in the godswood, every flicker of torchlight across the courtyard, one could almost sense a father's watchful gaze, quietly proud of the family and kingdom he had defended with his final breath twice. And that was how the tale would be remembered. That, when the night was darkest and all hope seemed lost, Ned Stark returned from the grave at his son's call, to stand beside the children he loved and hold back the tide of death. A father's devotion bridged the veil between worlds, and a family once shattered by tragedy reunited for the sake of everyone they held dear. By sunrise, the living emerged victorious, and Ned Stark slipped back into legend. His watch done, his spirit finally at rest beneath the ancient stones of Winterfell. There, in the crypts that bore his name, he would sleep once more. But this time, the North he had served so loyally would know the dawn, and his legacy would echo in every breath of the wind across the snowy plains, reminding all that honor, family, and memory never truly die.